Hello and welcome to Taking the Biz. In this video, we're going to investigate the topic of globalization for A-level business students. So globalization can best be defined as the increasing trend for markets to be international in scope rather than domestic. So rather than have firms in Germany that manufacture cars and serve purely German consumers, the automobile market is now global in scope. The same 10 to 12 firms compete not just for customers in one country, but compete for all of the customers around global markets. So globalization means that rather than markets being contested purely by domestic firms, they are now contested by international organizations. Now, for your exam, it's important to understand some of the reasons why globalization has evolved. And perhaps one of those is the removal of trade barriers. As decades have gone by, more and more countries have become members of a trading bloc, and they've relaxed some of the barriers to trade, like quotas and tariffs that they may previously have enforced. And when those kind of protectionist policies are relaxed, it's more enticing for overseas firms to want to go and try and sell in those markets. So the removal or the relaxation of trade barriers has encouraged more trade between nations, and it's been a contributing factor to the globalization of markets, as has a related point, that of political change. There are a large number of countries around the world whose political circumstances have evolved over recent decades. Lots of countries in Eastern Europe, or the example of China, would be a good example of a country whose political situation has changed, and rather than those economies being more inward looking and protectionist due to political reform and evolution, those countries are now more active in their pursuit of allowing foreign firms to come and try and penetrate their marketplace. Perhaps one of the biggest reasons why globalization has accelerated at the pace that it has been the reduction in costs that firms might encounter by trying to trade internationally. Particularly transport costs and communication costs are now much lower than they may have been in previous eras. So now it's not as costly for firms to want to try and expand into markets that might be on the other side of the world. And those firms might be able to transport or ship goods from one country to another country far quicker than they previously could, making it more efficient and more effective to trade internationally than it once was, but also a cheaper proposition as well. Now, the growth of businesses has also played a role in increased levels of globalization. In particular, the success of some of the formative multinational companies has really acted as an enticement for other businesses to want to try and replicate those fortunes. So businesses that have perhaps reached the potential that they might be able to grow to in their own saturated domestic markets will look at the successes that some of the big global multinational or transnational organizations are experiencing and naturally want to try and experience those kind of growth rates themselves. So as multinational companies move from market to market, growing the sphere of influence that they have in global business, it makes it a more attractive proposition for other businesses to try the same, as they see businesses in other firms experiencing the success of that. Another reason for globalization is the increasing rates of foreign direct investment, or FDI, that economies are experiencing. So foreign direct investment is businesses actually investing in an overseas economy, building some kind of infrastructure in that economy, whether it be a production base or retail outlets or other kind of facilities in those nations. Now, if you're going to build and invest in a foreign country, the logical next step is to also sell your goods and services whilst you are there. If you're going to develop a state-of-the-art factory in an overseas nation, why not also sell your products in that country? So as firms are investing in overseas countries, as firms are taking advantage of some of the opportunities to produce in foreign nations, it is the logical next step for them also to sell their goods to consumers in those nations, and it contributes to greater levels of globalization. So socio-geographic factors might also be playing a role in increased levels of globalization. Factors such as migration of people around the world might be fueling the pace of globalization that's taking place. As workers consider themselves to be operating in a global labour market rather than just a local labour market, more and more people are prepared to take their skills not just to another part of their own country to find work, but to another part of the world. And most countries around the planet now will have large pools of migrated labour that has moved to their country to work. Now, this migration creates opportunities for organisations not just to hire employees with greater skill sets, but maybe also to hire employees that might be prepared to pay for lower wage rates. Now, this obviously makes firms' costs lower and it makes them more competitive, and so that they can sell their products around the globe at cheaper prices, making their products potentially more attractive to consumers in different countries than domestic producers' firms might be. So it fuels the demand for globalized businesses as foreign consumers want to buy the cheaper goods that foreign firms may be able to sell in their markets. Another geographical factor that might be contributing to globalization is the sheer growth in global population figures. In particular, the growth of populations in certain countries such as India and China makes those markets so attractive to overseas businesses that it's only natural for firms from outside of those countries to want to go and sell there. So it may be that because of the growth of global populations, many businesses from countries with smaller populations than India or China or other more populous nations such as America, Nigeria, Indonesia, Brazil, it might be that those countries seem particularly attractive to firms from outside of those nations, so that they want to try and penetrate those markets with their goods and services. Perhaps the final factor we could talk about in essays that might be fueling the rate of globalization around the world is nations changing the structure of their economy. As a nation's economy becomes more developed, it becomes less reliant on primary sector industries and secondary sector industries as well. And there's a growing need and demand for consumers for greater service sector industries. But it may well be that as an economy is emerging, its own service or tertiary sector is quite underdeveloped. It's only at its fledgling stage. But there will be a whole host of experienced multinational companies that are ready to move into that market and satisfy this growing demand for greater levels of services. So because consumers can't wait for a nation to develop its own service sector, they swarm onto multinational companies and their goods and services as they develop this rampant demand from middle-class consumers with growing incomes for the kind of services that they want to try and enrich their lives. So this really is a rainbow of reasons as to why globalization has occurred in the first place and why the rate of globalized industries has accelerated over recent decades. Hopefully this video helps explain them. See you very soon. As always, you keep on taking the biz.
The Taking the Biz Hot Topics Guidebook is now available, packed with tips about how to analyse and evaluate some of the most frequently examined topics in A-level business. You can head to takingthebiz.com to purchase your copy now.